Eating an ashwagandha gummy.
Oh, really?
With ashwagandha, rhodiola. What a funny word.
Oh,
Rhodiola.
that's
Whoever came up with that mix knows what they're doing because that's a really good mix. Ashwagandha and rhodiola. Is
they're
it
Passion flower and
probably
chamomile.
okay? Well, I don't know about that, but okay, they need to delete those two. So, but rhodiola, not a lot of people know about that. Rhodiola and ashwagandha are probably the only two things I've ever taken that actually do something. But like, I mean, I've taken, as you know, thousands of supplements, and I probably take about 30. I think last time I counted, it was about 36 a day, 36 different supplements. But
God, you have the most expensive pee of anybody I know.
yeah, 34 of them are a complete waste, probably. But so 34 of them are a waste, and then two of them, ashwagandha and rhodiola, are. It's not just in my head; they definitely work.
I used to go to like this herbal shop in Portland and get they would just have like it was a library, but instead of books, just jars, floor to ceiling, of any kind of root or flower or herb that you could possibly want. And I would just get like ashwagandha. I might be saying this incorrectly, but astragalus.
Yeah, I don't know how to say it either, but I've taken it. Speaking of taking things, um, did you ever take um I was thinking it while you were talking, and now that I'm speaking, I'm completely drawing a blank. But okay, all right, it's gone.
Ashwagandha, osha root.
No,
Um,
it's a psychedelic.
oh, 5-MeO,
No,
uh, DOB, DOT, DOC, DUI, 2CB, 2CI, MDA, MDMA.
are you reading a list of?
No,
things.
no, I'm not reading anything. I'm just like,
Oh, just off the top of my head, just this week, I've got.
weird that you're bringing this up because um lately I'll just be doing like something completely innocuous. Like earlier I was getting the sweater down, and as I'm like pulling the bin off of the shelf, I'll have these like passing, like very, very, very brief, like passing moments where, and I can't even say what exactly it is, but I'll just have this moment where I'm like, that reminds me of being on acid, but
Mm,
it's not a specific thing. It's like a feeling. Um,
mm,
and it's not like there's nothing that I was doing about like pulling a sweater down that I can think of that I ever like was tripping and was just like, wow, this is like really a really impactful moment where I'm like getting this box down. Like I'm gonna remember this forever. Now every time I get a box down, I'm just like that one time on acid. Um,
mm,
has like it's not connected to anything. It's just like I don't know, something totally just unrelated. And it's very, very brief, like super brief. And the only reason that I notice it is because whatever, like, whatever speed I'm going, like, like, oh, I'm just having a regular interaction with this cup. And so let's say, a regular interaction is like picking the cup up, drinking, or something like picking the cup up, drinking, putting it down. So that's one speed, and you're just like doing that, right? That's your whole interaction. There's nothing interesting about it. The only reason that I notice these like weird splices in is because I'll be take up the cup, take a sip from it, and then like as I'm about to put it down, like spliced in, just like a tiny slice of some old acid trip. And so
mm.
it'll be like beep. And I'm just like, that's weird. This was not connected to anything, but somewhere along the line, my brain spliced in just like the feeling of a trip, not hallucinating anything, not like having a flashback, just this, just a splice.
Uh,
You know how like in Fight Club where
Yeah, the cigarette burn.
I
no, the porn.
Yeah, I think they call that a cigarette burn.
I'm sorry, you said that, and I was thinking about
Oh yeah, the what do you put the? I don't know what it was, but it was like a lye. I think like acid or something. It made his skin burn, chemical burn. That's a really interesting part. So much of that movie, as it turns out, is Stoic philosophy, which I've been reading about. I've read enough about it to know that I'm not subscribing to Stoicism, but it's difficult to say that Stoicism is this or that. It's not really like a belief system necessarily. Like we've kind of made it that way, but I don't think the people who started Stoicism were the people we call Stoics. They were not Stoics as far as they were concerned. They didn't realize that they would later be in books called Stoic philosophy. They were just writing philosophy. You know what I mean? They were just writing the way they interface with the world and their thoughts on it. So it was basically like ancient common sense, or at the time modern common sense. And then later people piece it all together in books and they call it Stoicism. So and a lot of those people, they never knew each other or met each other, and they lived in different centuries. So there was no collaboration of ideas other than the people who had maybe read some people who had come before them. But so to say Stoic philosophy is not necessarily like saying Republican, right? Or Christian or something like that. Like it's just but now of course we have categorized it in certain ways where it's people who find value in being alone and some other things, but I don't really think that's what the original authors meant. They weren't subscribing to anything in particular. But anyways, so the movie Fight Club.
hold on, can you define stoicism? I mean,
No,
I
no, I
have what
can't.
I
No, I've read multiple books on it, and it seemed like, well, that's just good advice. But the deeper I got into the history of Stoicism, the less I was able to define it.
I when you were talking about like
Oh, but let me before I forget. That's so it turns out that the movie Fight Club was sort of the promoting of Stoic philosophy. So a lot of what Tyler Durden said is like straight from Stoicism, like books on Stoicism, and so that's where that came from, which is like his burning hand, where he goes like, "This is your burning hand." That's that's a very Stoic philosophy quote. Whereas he's like, "This is the greatest moment in your life, man, and you're off somewhere missing it," because he's like, "This is a learning experience." So it's like he's doing everything he can to not focus on the moment, to put himself in a happy place with the penguins and Marla. But Tyler Durden's like, "You're right here. This is your burning hand. It's right here. It's right in front of you. Don't miss it." And so, like, of course, I saw that movie 1,000 times, and it wasn't until maybe this year that I picked up on all the Stoic philosophy in it, watching it again. And like, you don't need stuff to be happy, and it questions hedonism and all these things, and so it's fun to watch it again with that perspective. But I even got a bracelet. So I was on Amazon, where you can make custom bracelets with phrases, and I made one that said, "This is your burning hand," and it's like, don't skip it. If you're suffering, there's a reason, and there's something you can learn from it. Even if the only thing you learn is don't do it again, there's something to be learned. But usually there's more to learn than just that.
I think too like which is interesting because hearing you talk about like stoicism is very different from the character, the characteristic of stoicism that I have in my head, which is a characteristic that's like very disconnected from, say, like the Rock, on this like
Right.
this jetty, and it's just like not
Right.
moving, and the waves are crashing, and it's just like
Right.
still there.
Yeah.
Which is like very disconnected from what's happening around it. It's like I'm not going to move or break in the face of all of in this onslaught, which is like you're not connected then to what's going on around you. You're disconnecting yourself from what's going on around,
Like not affected by the environment around them.
which sounds honestly more like a coping mechanism.
Right. Yeah.
Like which is necessary sometimes.
We need to be smart about things. That's why I don't subscribe to anything. That's why, like, people will say, "Are you a whatever?" And I'm like, "I'm Jonathan." That's what you get, okay? I mean, because I believe a lot of things, but then if you go on YouTube and you watch people talk about their practice of stoicism, some of them will say that it gets better to be alone and to learn to enjoy being alone and things like that. But I don't support that at all, because the research seems to suggest that everyone has a different amount of social interaction that they require. Some people are like, it's a spectrum, right? Some people are high on the scale and some people are low on how much they need, but they do need it. And if they don't get that amount, their life's not in balance, right? The whole ecosystem is thrown off for them. And so we've got to be smart about it. I mean, and another example is like, I'm very libertarian in some of my views, but I'm not a libertarian because I don't believe in a lot of it. There's just some things I just can't subscribe to.
Like I
have some very conservative views, but I would not say that I'm a conservative.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's just like we can't avoid using our heads, because like you said, being stoic, and so clearly the word's a homonym, it's one word with different meanings. So in the sense of being straight-faced and not affected by the environment around you, well, sometimes it's okay to be affected by the environment around you. Yeah, and you want to, right? I mean, you certainly don't want to be with your kids on Christmas morning and refuse to be excited, even though you feel that you want to be, because you're like, this moment's just going to go. It's a fleeting moment and I shouldn't enjoy it because I'm stoic. Well, I mean, it's okay to be happy, man. Like, you know what I mean? You don't be a Debbie Downer and then everyone around you is taking on your negative energy. So I don't know, it just seems like you can't avoid common sense in anything, any practice. So I don't subscribe to anything. And my mind is pretty easily changed too. Like, people convince me of things pretty without a lot of resistance from me. So ayahuasca, that's what it is. So you've taken
ashwagandha.
You've taken ashwagandha. You've gone to ashwagandha rituals with ashwagandha shamans, and
yeah. Although these gummies didn't make me projectile vomit, which was pretty cool.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about. So first of all, where did you go to? Was it another country? What country?
Colombia.
Okay, I'll get the details later. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about was what you started off talking about before I rudely interrupted, which is what were the effects? Does it make you projectile vomit? Is there any way to get around that, like not eating the day before, like fasting or something?
No, there's a whole preparation you're supposed to do. So like
Whoa, I wonder if that's where some of the mythology of exorcisms came from, with like when the demons come out of you and you turn into a different person and like you projectile vomit, in these exorcist movies. Wow. They believe when people say God bless you when you sneeze, it was because a long time ago, apparently, people believed that when you were sick, it's because you had the juju in you, you had demons in you. And when you sneeze, that's the demons coming out. And so so you'd be like, "Achoo," and they'd be like, bless you. And it's like to prevent the demons from coming back in, I guess. I don't know. So, wow, I wonder if, and of course, those rituals with the shamans, I mean, it was very spiritual in nature. I mean, they attached a lot of theology to those plant substances. Are they plant substances, or is that a plant one?
Ayahuasca.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. There you go. So,
It's
anyways,
it's a vine, I believe. But
so to the vomiting.
more about the vomiting.
Yeah.
So, I it was supposed to be me and one of my friends and his girlfriend, who was Colombian. So she's the one that kind of plugged us all with this, with this. They don't call him a shaman; they call him a taita. Same thing, basically. It's a shaman. But then
Taita.
at the last minute, she couldn't get off work, and so me and my friend, there's no like Ubers or public buses, in the Andes Mountains. So we're just in some random community van, and we're going through the mountains, and we had to pass through this big multiple military checkpoints, where they had tanks and people standing there with giant machine guns. And the reason was because we were so close to FARC territory, which is like a giant like drug cartel.
Mm-hmm.
And so every time we'd pass through one of those checkpoints, we have to stop. The military would search the vehicle. They'd look through our stuff, and be like, okay, be safe, keep going.
Really?
And then we get, yeah. And so for 5 days prior to that, you stop drinking alcohol, and then the next day you cut out meat, and then the next day you cut out. It's just like it was a series of cutting things out, and you had to do it. You couldn't just say, "Oh, on the first day, I'm just going to cut everything out." You had to kind of like bring your body down in stages. So the last thing that you could eat was just nuts and fruit, dried fruit.
How long before?
And then I think you couldn't eat anything. I want to say, I'm really just making this up, I think 12 hours before. So we get to this tiny little town. From the town, we just flagged down somebody driving, and they drove us about an hour and a half outside of this tiny town in the mountains, deeper into the mountains, and then hiked maybe another 2 hours. And it wasn't even a village. It was just like 3 buildings where this Taita lived, with a couple of people. And members of communities around there would come. Like, he had this room behind the ceremony room, and there was some 17-year-old kid who was addicted to heroin, and he was being treated with ayahuasca to come out, to stop being addicted, to kind of like come off of heroin. And it was just really interesting. So people would come, from around the area. They would come, if they wanted to get off of drugs, or if they had some other kind of ailment, and the Taita would treat them, with ayahuasca. And I was the only American. I didn't speak any Spanish. Still don't really speak any Spanish, but and I was one of 2 women. So in the ceremony, women are served last. And I'm sure plenty of people nowadays would be like, "What, winner?" Like, shut up, shut up,
Okay.
shut up. It doesn't matter. It's a cultural thing. It's fine.
It could be to be nice. I mean, the men used to eat weird stuff first, so that if they died, that their wife and kids wouldn't die.
Yeah.
If I were a woman, I'd be like, hell yeah, you do it first, dumbass. Yeah. After everyone's wigging out, be like, how about that ayahuasca? Woo. I just took a champion-sized dose. Trust me.
It's like leaking out of my pocket. So I was the last person in the room to take it and the first person to throw up. And I just like, I feel it in my stomach and I'm just like, oh, really nauseated. Oh, even more nauseated. Oh, but I was just like, I think I need to just get up. And as I'm like walking out kind of like quickly walking out the door, I've got my hand over my mouth and everything that's coming up is just liquid because I haven't eaten anything in 12 hours, except for, 12 hours prior to that, some nuts and, dried fruit, and water. So, and then ayahuasca, which was like really thick. It was like this kind of just like a thick substance. So I'm not puking up like chunks of anything, but
like liquid, like jelly.
Yeah. Not like jelly, like,
I don't know.
Have you ever had drinking chocolate before?
Drinking.
Are we talking about chocolate milk?
No,
In
and
which
I don't
case,
even know why
yeah,
I'm
5
using
times
I don't even know
today.
why I'm using drinking chocolate as an example because I've never had drinking chocolate.
Is it like syrup or what? I mean,
No, it's pretty much just melted chocolate.
melted chocolate. Okay.
So it's like much thicker than hot cocoa.
Like fondue.
I feel like if you tried to drink fondue, you would suffocate. Oh, you're talking about chocolate fondue, not cheese fondue. Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking cheese fondue, and I'm like,
personally
man, you would.
testify that you don't suffocate when you drink chocolate fondue.
But if you were drinking cheese fondue,
You'd be really happy.
I feel like you could suffocate though. What temperature does cheese melt at? It's got to be higher than your body temperature. So if you were like trying to chug, well, I don't know, like it's got to be for the cheese that they're using too. It's got to be.
Oh yeah, I mean probably I didn't have like proper fondue, but I mean maybe if it was. Well, maybe I'm dwelling too much on this.
Well, hold on. We'll get back to the ayahuasca in a second, but I think this is worthwhile.
Yeah,
so what if you had a cup double this size, right?
Okay.
You ever had like a big glass of water and you're just like, oh, I just have to drink this all. I'm so thirsty.
Yeah.
What if that was cheese fondue? So terrible. At some point, the first gulp, it would probably be fine, but at some point, the cheese that's like in the vessel entering into your mouth and being swallowed would cool, and start to solidify more. And I feel like you could suffocate.
Well, you know that your lungs and your stomach are 2 separate locations.
Yes. However, I guess maybe suffocation is the wrong word. Maybe it's asphyxiation. I don't know. But like, I feel like at some point with cheese, if you were just like chugging cheese, it would solidify in your throat, blocking off your esophagus, and your trachea.
Okay. Now we're making sense. Yeah.
Right. That's what I'm thinking. I'm like, man, I don't think you can chug cheese.
It would just turn into like a can of baked beans in your throat and
no, a can of refried beans.
Plug everything up. Yeah. Refried beans. That's what I mean.
Yeah. So yeah, I just drinking chocolate though. Yeah. Drinking cheese, no. Drinking chocolate. Yeah, I guess maybe. I don't know. I've never had chocolate fondue. So
Hmm.
but yeah, sure. Um, but the consistency of the ayahuasca was thick. So
And how much of it?
um
Like teaspoon, tablespoon, cup?
I don't know. It was just a small wooden carved, I don't
Hmm.
know. The Taita had this like assistant Taita,
Huh.
who was doling out the thing, and it was a very dimly lit room.
Hmm.
It's the middle of the night. We had to wait. The ceremony started at midnight. And they just came around, and I don't even know how big the cup was. Drink it, and last one to drink it, first person to puke. As I'm running towards the opening in the building, because there wasn't a door, it was just an opening. And I'm just like holding my hand over my mouth, and I feel it like it's coming out, and it's like coming through my fingers.
These people, this is their full-time job, and they haven't figured out they need to invest in barf bags or hand out some cup or something for people to puke in.
Well, okay, so I guess like when Western people talk about going and doing ayahuasca in another country, they're talking about like going to some like center, like like a retreat center. Um, this was not like that. This was me literally being in a tiny, tiny village in the Andes Mountains in Colombia, in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing. There's nothing like luxurious or pampered or glamorous about this at all. This was
Hmm.
just a straight up, ayahuasca ceremony. Um, and yeah, it was like, hey man, if you're gonna throw up, just go do it outside. There
Hmm.
weren't like barf bags or anything like that. Um, and as I'm running towards the door, I'm throwing up, it's getting on the ground. I don't remember it getting on me at all, but I didn't feel embarrassed at all, which I thought was interesting. And the Taita's assistant is just like, he's been like singing and doing like these little chants the whole time. And he's just like walking behind me with a mop, and he's just like really happy, like cleaning it up. And I'm just like, wow, he's really stoked to be cleaning up my vomit. And so I just go outside and, threw up, came back in. Shortly, everybody else followed. I was the only person who didn't get diarrhea. Everybody else did. And they just went
Hmm.
into the little outhouse area. And luckily, I didn't. And thank goodness.
Well, I'm out.
Well, I mean, listen, I didn't get diarrhea, so that was cool.
100% chance of vomit and 90% chance of projectile diarrhea.
I mean, I don't know if 90% is accurate because I didn't get it.
Okay, how many people were in the room?
I don't know, maybe like 7 or 8.
7 or 8. Okay, so close enough.
But I also have a very sensitive tummy, and I would have expected that I would have expected that, if anybody was going to get, explosive diarrhea, I would have assumed it would be me, but it wasn't. And then, sometime later, they came around and they gave everybody a second dose. And, sure enough, like clockwork, maybe like, I don't know, there was no time at that point. at some point I just felt like, okay, I'm gonna go and throw up. But this time I didn't wait until I was like about, like puking through my fingers. Just as soon as I had that feeling in my stomach, I was like, cool. So I just took myself out of the room and I walked, down this little dirt path into this big field that was full of these gigantic, shaggy cows with like huge horns. And there were all these like little like hills, like little like mounds. And I was like, I'm not sitting on cow poop. I was just like, you're on a psychedelic, but it wasn't like oh, I'm like tripping. It was different than LSD, where LSD is like, it's mental, but it's also very visual. It was different than mushrooms, which is physical, mental, and visual. I guess you could say all psychedelics are those things to some extent, but as somebody who's taken both of them, you can differentiate, like, I'm on a mushroom trip versus I'm on an LSD trip. And this was like neither of those. It was, for me, interacting on like a completely different level where I wasn't hallucinating and I didn't feel, like I was like tripping. So I was 100% sure that I was not, crouched on a pile of cow manure. And I just sat on this little like grassy mound, looking up at those beautiful stars. I could see the outline of the mountains around me. And, it was dark, but I could see the outline of like some of the cows. And I was just like, what? And it was just like very peaceful. And then I went back in at some point later, and it was like a communication. I don't know how to say this without it sounding kind of cheesy, but it was like some part of my soul, deep, deep, deep down, was in communication with some sort of like feminine entity. But it was like genderless. And so when I say feminine, I'm just thinking of what we ascribe as feminine qualities, of like compassionate, nurturing, empathetic, wise, all those things. And what I came out of that experience with, I couldn't really tell you about the experience because I don't know. I just can't can't put it into words. But what I walked out of it with was the understanding of what it means to love without condition. People talk about like unconditional love. And I think a lot of people think that unconditional love is like, oh, I love you no matter what, like that doesn't matter what you do. Like, I love you. But to love without condition is really like, what is a condition? A condition of my love is that, that you bring me a cheese pizza every Friday and thank you. I would like, Supreme, if you could make it like, can we change the condition?
Why cheese? I mean,
I don't know. It was the first thing that came into my head.
Low standards. You have more self-respect.
Right, man. All right, throw some mushrooms on there, not the psychedelic ones. Some sausage and pepperoni. Just make it like a Supreme would be best. But so we think of like unconditional love as like, oh, that just means that you love somebody no matter what. But all interactions have conditions on them. Like, for example, you can love somebody, but you can not like what they do. Or I will be in a relationship with you and, but like my presence has conditions on it. Like, I will remove, myself from your presence, or I will remove you from my presence if you punch me in the face. So there are conditions on everything, but to kind of go back to loving unconditionally, um, in the way that we, as a society use that term is really like loving with expectation. And that happens a lot, which is, oh, I love you if you love me. But then that means that your definition and expression of love has to match up to my expectations. And we somehow, need to have the same definition and expectations, which is like impossible. So to love someone, to truly love somebody without the expectation that they are going to love you in some way back, and to really be okay with that, to really be like, I am happy to extend and to feel this like emotion towards this individual, regardless of how this individual feels about me. And so in a way, maybe that is something that a parent can attest to. Although I think with parents, there's more at play because you literally have a genetic bond with this entity. So it's more than unconditional love. I think true unconditional love could only be experienced between two individuals who are not related to each other, because then there's nothing connecting them. There's nothing that's like forcing that connection. So anyway, I walked out of it with the understanding of what it means to love without expectation. And I got to apply that. I've had many chances to apply that and to be like, oh, okay, that's what it means. And noticing like, oh, am I loving with expectation and attachment, and I don't mean attachment like, of course you want to be attached to somebody that you love, but attachment really just means like,
maybe.
Yeah, like expectation, like, oh, I love this person, and they say that they love me, but they did this or they said that, or
Yeah, I've noticed that people like me as for the length of time that I fit into their idea of me, right? So it's like they form, so whatever it is, if like you're the funny guy or girl, and people kind of identify you that way initially and decide to be friends with you, like they'll like you for the length of time that you maintain that be that funny person. Or if you're like the cool guy and people are like, well, he's the cool guy, like they'll like you for as long as they perceive you as being the cool guy. And even when like dating too, not just friendships, but people do that with the people they date, where like they'll just get this initial idea of the person they're with or their partner, and they'll love them for the length of time that they fulfill that idea. And then when the idealism goes away, so does their affection for you. And so that's a mature understanding you've come to on love, where I find that love should be more of a mindset, right? So I read this book called Love for No Reason, and it was a little corny, but it did.
hold on, it's really dark where you are.
The sun's gone down. Yeah. I've got a lot of lights I can plug in.
I'll just plug one in.
You don't have to plug in a lot of lights. You can just plug in.
I'll just do one. How about
that? Yeah, a light.
Oop.
Yeah, I've got the studio in the basement, but I just didn't get tired of going down there. So the path of least resistance is right here. But what was I saying? Yeah, so Love for No Reason, the book. It was a little corny, but it did open up my mind to the idea that love could be a mindset. So where I'm not loving because fill in the blank, right? Where it's like, I'm just going out and I got love for the cashier at the grocery store. And if they're in a pissy mood, I'm really sorry that they're having a bad day and I feel for them because I have them too. You know what I mean? And it's like love for no reason. So it's like where love starts with you. So rather than being a condition, but I don't know how that jives with the research on love. I listened to a love researcher lecture on love, and according to her studies, she has a whole department on it where that's all they do is research love. And she identified love as three different things. So there's attachment. And they did this with like fMRI scans, you know, where they introduce a certain stimulus to their subject and then measure their brain. And I'm not sure what type of response they're looking for there, but they found that
Probably like the like a light up in like the hypothalamus or the pituitary or something like
Sure.
that. There's a shadow, like the microphone is casting a shadow like right here, and it's
what
like
I need
really,
to do is turn that light on and then that
it's
one
so
on.
distracting. I'm so
And-
sorry.
Okay, here. Well,
It looks like you have like a really bad goatee.
So attachment, we've covered that, but that could be a lot of things, right? Like your favorite blanket when you were a kid, your children, you have some attachment, right? You don't want to let them go no matter how they act. And then there's love that is obviously sexual in nature. And then the third one, I think, is more of a drug type of love, where it sort of activates the same parts of you that are lit up when people are addicted to drugs.
Like infatuation.
Infatuation, sure, yeah. I don't remember much about the third one, but
Oxytocin.
well, oxytocin was more connected to the attachment form of love.
Oh yeah, because it's kind of it's a bonding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a bonding.
Yep. So, anyways, so those are three manifestations of love.
There's these researchers. They did there was an article about them, I think in the New York Times a few years ago, which is what sort of briefly popularized the study that they did. So they came up with this set of questions, and you know, they called it like, so basically it was like something that like a process that they developed to like make people fall in love. But what it actually was designed to do is like the questions are designed to like you ask these questions to another person, they ask them to you, you answer them, you talk about it. And it's meant to, remember how I was talking about like with ayahuasca, you know, the first day you cut out alcohol, the second day you cut out, and so you kind of bring your body to like a pure place step by step. And these questions are designed to bring you to a place of trust and vulnerability and trust, that you are able to be vulnerable with this person and you're able to trust this person and then you. And then at the end of these questions, I think it was like 36 questions, you and the other person stare at each other, like, you know, in the eyes. You don't talk, you don't, you know, try to like laugh or like, you know, anything. You just like gaze into each other's eyes, and the feedback, especially about the eye thing, was that after about a minute, you know, that first minute, it's like very uncomfortable, and then after that 1 minute mark is when there are these just like, I don't know, like people would start to cry. And their feedback on that was, you feel like very naked, or you feel like very exposed. And it's like a very like primal kind of interaction, because there's no words, there's nothing in between you and this other person, and you're just like looking at each other. And people self-reported, feeling like very seen, very like raw and vulnerable, and loved, and just it was very, very, and I've been like dying to do that, like to try that, because it sounds so interesting, in the research that they went through to develop, these questions that are asked in a specific order. It sounds so fascinating to me. And I've talked about this, since reading about it. I've dated a couple of people, and they're like, "Oh, do you want to do it?" And I'm like, "With you? No, I'm good." Because I wouldn't want to just like, the whole point of it is not like, oh, fall in love with somebody. It's about like trust and vulnerability. And I think that it's really fascinating. And we do a lot of things to kind of almost going back to Stoicism as we, culturally know it, kind of like put up these walls and protect ourselves, and, save face. And, we don't want people to see these parts of us that we don't like, or that don't feel good, that are painful or tender. And to go through that process with somebody, maybe naturally that process might take a few months or a few years or 10 years or something like that. But the purpose of these questions is to kind of take, that the process of trusting somebody and and allowing yourself to be vulnerable with them and you, to condense it down into this set of questions, and then this like activity, this exercise that you do with each other. It sounds so interesting, and I've been dying to do it. And I've watched videos of people just staring, at each other and kind of doing that part of the practice. And it just looks so beautiful. So beautiful. And I get like, ugh, it just sounds really, really, really cool. And it also sounds really challenging, and it sounds scary. And so I'm like, oh yeah, I want to do that. Like, that sounds awesome.
What's it called again? I want to look for this online, see what it's about.
I don't know what it's called, but I'm sure you could just simply, what was the last thing you looked at? Ashwagandha root. Questions to make you fall in love. The 36 questions that lead to love. First thing that comes up is the New York Times.
36 questions that lead to love.
To fall in love with anyone, do this, which is the title of a study by psychologist Arthur Aaron and others that explores whether intimacy between two strangers can be accelerated by having them ask each other a specific series of personal questions. The 36 questions in the study are broken up into 3 sets, with each set intended to be more probing than the previous one. The idea is that mutual vulnerability fosters closeness. To quote the study's author, one key pattern associated with the development of a close relationship among peers is sustained, escalating, reciprocal personal self-disclosure. Allowing oneself to be vulnerable with another person can be exceedingly difficult, so this exercise forces the issue. The final task, staring into each other's eyes for 4 minutes, is less well documented, with a suggested duration ranging from 2 minutes to 4. Yeah, 2 minutes is just, this person who wrote the article did it. But Miss Cantron was unequivocal in her recommendation. 2 minutes is just enough to be terrified. 4 really goes somewhere. Um, I'm like, wow, this sounds cool. Yeah, I want to try this. So like set one, one of the questions, the first question, given the choice of anyone in the world, whom would you want as a dinner guest? And then let's see, the first question in set two, if a crystal ball could tell you the truth about yourself, your life, the future, or anything else, what would you want to know? Question
Winning lottery
21, which
numbers.
is, yeah, right. With question
That's easy.
21, which is still in set two, is what roles do love and affection play in your life? The first question of set three is make 3 true we statements each. For example, like I would say, like, we are in this Zoom call. We both stare off into the distance when we're talking, like something like that. And let's see. Tell your partner, 31, tell your partner something that you like about them. When did you last cry in front of another person or by yourself? The final question is share a personal problem and ask your partner's advice on how he or she might handle it. Also ask your partner to reflect back to you how you seem to be feeling about the problem you have chosen. And then, you know, the eye gazing thing. And it just sounds really interesting as somebody who, you know, literally studies a lot of these things. I just think it sounds like a really interesting process to try.
Oh yeah, I've got to read what these 36 questions are. I've got to know now. So yeah, when we get off this call, it's going to be the first thing I do. From a negotiation standpoint, that's a lot of the stuff that we studied in negotiations was how to like make a connection fast. And some examples would be talk about family. Empathy is the biggest one, so it's really just find ways to empathize. And we statements was in there too. Like you don't really want to say a lot of I statements or you, but it is beneficial to try and form them as we statements whenever possible, and absolutely empathize. So that's interesting. That's interesting. I wonder how many similarities there are. Because you would imagine that it's not 36 ways to make anyone fall in love, but you could be just reading or listening to what you were reading. It sounds like good ways to decide that you really don't like someone based on their answers because it's like what I forget what one of them was, but I was like, boy, I mean, depending on their answer to that question, I could just immediately decide that I don't want anything to do with them.
Yeah. But I mean, how interesting though. Instead of, you know, instead of spending, you know, months trying to like drag out this information from somebody, you could just be like, hey, you got about an hour? Let's run through this at the end of the hour. Cool. Yeah, this isn't gonna, bye. You know.
I wonder what if you took those 36 those 36 were they questions and took them to speed dating, and every time you sat down just go through all 36, right? So I don't know, I've never done it, so imagine you have 5 minutes or something and you sit down with one person and you're just like, what was a moment in your life that you were okay, and if you had the choice between hot dogs and sandwiches, which would you choose? And if you just I don't know, you got through as many of the 36 as possible.
And then you spend like the last, like, you know, 45 seconds that you have and be like, okay, now we're just gonna like, don't say anything, just stare.
Yeah, stare. I had a staring contest with my dog. I lost horribly. He's just, yeah, he's stoic.
Yeah. All right. I'm not gonna. When I think of stoicism now, I won't think of, you know, the the grizzled old man with the cutting jawline, staring off with the pipe in his mouth, as the waves crash around him. I'm just gonna think about your dog. Like,
Yeah, it's such an interesting subject because what made me start looking into it was I put something on Instagram. It was something like, oh, the person who I don't. It's something like whoever's pleasures are the cheapest is the richest person. And I was thinking like it's good to spend time with family. That's when I when I reposted that, that's what came to my mind was like, yeah, I mean there are people who spend they're billionaires and they're unhappy and their families are in shambles, right? And it made sense to me, but then I was criticized. Somebody had said like why are you promoting this like this BS? And I was like I don't know, I just got it from some place and I thought it sounded good, so I reposted it. And
I don't know. I'm holding on for
Yeah,
a friend.
yeah.
that's the capitalist nonsense.
And I was
Oh
like,
my
capitalist
God. I totally
nonsense.
remember what you're talking about.
I was
Like,
like,
hey, what capitalist? Like, how? That's I was scratching my head for days on that. I couldn't figure out how it was bad to like spend time with family, but we were imagining two different things.
It's the opposite of capitalism.
Well, that's exactly what I thought. I thought this is the complete opposite of capitalism. It's like saying don't be greedy, value people and connections over stuff. Um, and they're yeah, so they were like, "Where'd you get it?" And I was like, oh, "I don't know. Like this person said it," and they were like, "Oh, well, they're like into stoicism," and I was like, "Okay, what does that mean?" I mean, I know what stoicism is loosely, and they're like, "Well, stoicism was designed by rich people to keep the poor people poor," and I was like, "What? That really is that true?" So I looked into like the history of stoicism, and that's when I found out that there's no origin to it. Like there isn't an inventor. Like so she said there somebody like a guy created it, and it was a rich king who created it, and I suspect I know who she was talking about because it's one prominent author. And and she said that he invented it to keep the poor people happy in poverty. But um, but it turns out that no one invented it. These are just writings that were taken from people who wrote things, and it's kind of like a somebody just made a collection of these proverbs, right, and put them into writings and started calling them stoicism. And the people who are writing it didn't label it as stoicism. And also the thing about that is that back in those times, it is unfortunate, but most of the writings that have withstood the test of time that we have from people, say from 3,000 years ago, well, they're going to be writings from rich people or royalty because those are the people who were literate, right? And also those were the people who wrote things that were worth saving according to other people. I mean, imagine like how many peasants are
Like
gonna.
the art of illumination is what they called it. Like so the basically like transcription, like transcribing things, writing things down. But because they did it like with art, or they like the instruments that they used was basically like you're painting, except you're painting words. Yeah, it's called like the art of illumination, and women weren't allowed. It was like a sacred practice, a sacred, ritual. You weren't allowed to, women weren't allowed to do it. But yeah, only rich people or monks, definitely dudes.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it's unfortunate, but it makes sense that we would have preserved the writings from some kings, right, or even queens, because they were kings and queens. So that's the kind of stuff that was saved for hundreds of years and thousands of years. Whereas so you either need to be famous or rich or royal, because right now, you or I could just put something on the internet and it's there forever. or as long as it's available. But at one time, that wasn't the case. You'd have to physically write it down, and whatever you wrote it on was probably going to deteriorate. So somebody had to find it worth copying or rewriting and keeping it safe and stored. And we also have to imagine it was, and this was before the printing press, right? So there was no mass production of this. Yeah, and intact. So it's anyway. There you go.
Yeah.
The weirdest game of telephone ever.
The weirdest game of telephone.
Yeah, yeah. Like hundreds of years ago, somebody was like, you know what? I'm gonna write down this thought, which is everybody be nice to each other. And then that person dies, and this, little tiny piece of, leaf that they've written this on is starting to fall apart. And another rich person is like, well, I've got this little leaf and it says this thing on it. But it's falling apart. I better write it down somewhere. And they're like, can't really quite make out what it says, but I think what it's saying is be extra super nice to each other. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna write that down, right? And then they have like a sturdier piece of parchment, it's written down on, and then they die, and this gets passed along, and then someone's like, well, I've got this piece of parchment, but it's falling apart. I have something better to write it down on. This notepad. What does it say? Be nice to rich people. Be nice to. Yeah, I think that's what it says. Okay. Yeah. Be nice, but only if they're rich. Got it. Right. And that person dies. And it's just like, and as it goes through the years, the original message, like be nice to each other suddenly now, means, two men can't love each other.
Okay. Yeah.
And I want to see this. I only saw the trailer for it, but there's this movie, I think it's called 1948, where it talks about how the word homosexuality did not appear in the Bible until the 40s. I mean, until 1948. And it was the King James version. So like all of these translations, this was another thing that I have many issues with organized religion, but growing up, as my mom was like very religious, and thank goodness not so much anymore. But anyway, even as a kid, it's just like there's so many versions of this book, and they kind of sound the same, but they're also different. And so even as a child, I was like, you guys say that you all believe the same thing, but you're all reading like slightly different versions of it. So which one are you supposed to believe? And then getting older, I'm like, wait, they're all, written by men. So of course they're going to be like, well, yeah, women are definitely lesser, and they're definitely evil, and they're definitely responsible for the downfall of humanity and all these things. And don't even get me started, man. I already started it myself. So yeah, these like translations over the years, because women weren't allowed to read or write, and then they became allowed to read, but then they couldn't write, and then they started publishing things under men's names and stuff like that. The majority of the stuff that you read historically is through the eyes and the account of men. And then it's translated, by somebody else. They could read something and be like, I don't really like the way that this person said that, so I'm going to paraphrase, or I'm just going to change it completely, but still say that, King Richard said this, when really it's like, some asshole monk that, was having a bad day, and his translation is like, you're like, fuck it, I'm just going to make it say this.
Some asshole monk. They ought to make a show called that, Asshole Monk. It's like, yeah, sort of like Billy Bob Thornton's like Christmas movie. We'll have Billy Bob Thornton come around, and he'll be asshole monk. That's a great movie.
Yeah. So yeah, I tend to anything that's like a historical account, especially like when women were definitely not allowed to do any of those things. I'm always like, of course the guy is gonna be like, well, yeah, I definitely caught a 50-foot fish. Like, yeah, bro, because you're the one who's writing the story. So, like, of course you're going to be like, well, yeah, I was the most handsome.
Come on now. Well, let me draw the line there. I think women probably embellish too. Just maybe they don't go fishing as often.
Yeah. I mean, of course, but I think maybe another area that embellishment, historically could happen would be through paintings. So, be like, well, I want you to paint me, but if you could paint me a little bit taller.
Yeah.
That song, I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I
The 10-inch dong and
yeah, right. But then like where you could find like maybe some of the truth would be like, okay, well, this person painted you this way, but we've got a bunch of other paintings where you have like a huge nose. Like, who's telling the truth? So yeah, maybe like the comparison of multiple accounts would be a great way to like verify, fact check. Right now,
I've heard that was if you want to know how many women a guy has slept with, just ask him how many, and then divide by 2. And if you if you want to know how many guys a woman slept with, ask her how many, and then multiply by 2.
Man, I have no idea. And it's not like, oh man, I've been like, getting some city miles, but like I found the practice of that at, very early on to be really pointless. And
well, especially when you get older.
yeah, well, and like the whole thing is like, it's just an opportunity to slut shame women, because if a guy's like, oh yeah, man, I slept with 50 chicks, even if he did, or whether he did or didn't, doesn't matter. People will be like, nice. A woman's like, I slept with 50 dudes. Everyone's like, you hoe. Like,
yeah. Well, then that's the thing is like, but what if the guy's 100 years old? Then that's only one every 2 years, and that's not so much. Like, it's like, man, what were you doing your whole life?
it takes you 2 years to close a deal.
Yeah.
Age matters. They're like birthdays. After a while, it's just like, wow, who's counting?
Who cares? Honestly, dude, I don't even keep track of how old I am. So many, like, I'm just like, how old am I? I ask people around me to keep track of that. The other day, like, I was talking to my roommate and I was like, how old am I? She was like, you're 37. You're going to turn 38 this year. And I'm like, thank you. I didn't really want to spend the time thinking about that, because it's just like, what's the point? Who cares?